200,000 years before the first king ever sat on a throne, someone was already leading. No crown, no army, no written law telling anyone to obey. And yet, people followed. In a world with no courts and no police, humans had already solved one of the hardest problems any species can face. Who gets to decide? The answer is stranger and far more interesting than the caveman cliché you grew up with. There was no single strongman clubbing his way to the top of the tribe. Anthropologists who study the last remaining hunter-gatherer societies on Earth have found something almost the opposite. The men who tried to bully their way into power were mocked, abandoned, or in the worst cases, killed by their own group. So if brute force wasn't the answer, what was? To understand that, we have to travel back further than any government, any crown, any written law, back to a time when leadership had to survive without a single one of the tools we use today. For roughly 95% of the time humans have existed on this planet, there were no chiefs, no kings, and no permanent bosses of any kind. Our ancestors lived in small, mobile bands, usually somewhere between 15 and 50 people, moving with the seasons, following herds, tracking rainfall, chasing whatever the land offered next. There was no palace, because there was no need for one. Everyone the group depended on lived within shouting distance. Everyone who might betray you, feed you, or save your life was someone you saw every single day. In a group, that small reputation wasn't a marketing strategy. It was survival currency. Lie once, steal once, hoard food once, and the entire band would know by nightfall. This was also a world without safety nets. No hospitals. No government stockpiles. No insurance if the hunt failed. A single bad season could kill an entire band, which meant cooperation wasn't a nice idea. It was the only thing standing between a group of humans and extinction. And cooperation on that scale creates a very specific problem. Somebody at some point has to make the call. Which direction do we walk? Do we cross the river now, or wait for the water to drop? Do we attack the rival band or avoid them? Somebody has to decide, and everybody else has to be willing to go along with it. That is the exact moment leadership was born, not as a title, but as a function the group could not survive without. So how did ancient humans choose who filled that role? Not through elections. Not through bloodlines. Anthropologist Christopher Boehm, who spent decades studying both modern hunter-gatherers and our closest primate relatives, found something remarkable. Early human bands were fiercely, almost obsessively, opposed to anyone accumulating too much power. The moment a man started ordering people around, the group had ways of putting him back in his place. Gossip, ridicule, simply ignoring him. If none of that worked, the group could refuse to share food with him, or walk away and leave him behind entirely. In the most extreme cases, historical and ethnographic records show bands actually executing men who tried to dominate the group by force. Boehm called this a reverse dominance hierarchy. Instead of one man ruling the many ruled the one, constantly watching for the first sign that somebody thought they were better than everyone else. But somebody still had to lead. So the question becomes even more interesting. If ancient humans actively punished anyone who grabbed for power, how did any leadership happen at all? The answer lies in a distinction psychologists didn't fully map out until the 21st century, a difference between two completely different roads to influence. One is called dominance. The other is called prestige. Dominance is what you already picture. Forcing obedience through fear, threats, or raw physical power. It is the oldest form of status in the animal kingdom, and our closest primate cousins, chimpanzees, still run on it almost entirely. Prestige works in the opposite direction. Nobody is forced to follow a prestigious person. They are followed because other people genuinely want to learn from them, copy them, and stand near them. A prestigious hunter wasn't obeyed because he threatened anyone. He was followed because he consistently found game when others came home empty-handed, and everyone wanted to learn how he did it. Researchers Joseph Henrich and Francisco Gil White proposed that prestige evolves specifically in humans because of something almost no other animal relies on: this heavily cultural learning. We survive by copying the most successful people around us, and copying works best when we can get close to them. So we reward useful, knowledgeable people with attention, respect, and deference, freely given, never demanded. This explains something that seems bizarre at first. In most hunter-gatherer societies, leadership wasn't even a single position. It was situational. The best tracker led during a hunt. The most experienced elder led during a dispute. Someone who had traveled further led during a migration into unfamiliar territory. The moment the task changed, the leader could change with it, and nobody found that strange because nobody was following a person out of fear. They were following whoever actually knew what they were doing. Archaeological evidence backs this up in ways that took decades to notice. For most of prehistory, grave sites show almost no signs of wealth inequality. Bodies from the same era, buried in the same region, tend to be laid to rest with nearly identical grave goods. A few tools, some ornaments, nothing suggesting one person ruled over the rest. That pattern holds for tens of thousands of years. Then, starting around the transition to farming roughly 12,000 years ago, something changes. Some graves suddenly become dramatically richer than others. Shell beads by the thousands. Ivory carvings. Entire ochre-covered burial sites reserved for a single individual. Archaeologists studying sites across Russia and parts of Europe have found burials so lavish they must have taken thousands of hours of collective labor to prepare. Evidence that permanent, inherited status had finally arrived. But that arrival took hundreds of thousands of years to happen. For almost the entire span of human existence, status had to be re-earned every single day through what a person actually contributed. There's also a piece of this story that gets left out constantly. Leadership wasn't only a male domain. In many foraging societies studied by anthropologists, older women held enormous informal authority, especially the ones researchers call grandmother figures, women past reproductive age who accumulated decades of ecological knowledge, knew which plants healed and which killed, and often controlled the distribution of gathered food, which in many bands made up the majority of daily calories. Influence didn't always look like standing at the front of the group. Sometimes it looked like being the person everyone quietly checked with before making a decision. You can still see traces of this ancient wiring today, everywhere you look. Watch what happens in a modern workplace when someone with zero formal authority becomes the person everyone secretly turns to for advice. Watch how quickly a bullying boss loses real loyalty, even while holding official power. Watch how often people online follow accounts that have never coerced them into anything, purely because they consistently deliver something valuable. That's prestige. Running the exact same program it ran 200,000 years ago. Fast forward through the theory, and the pattern holds up everywhere. Researchers look, coalition building mattered more than muscle, because a lone bully could always be outnumbered. Reputation moved faster than any weapon, spreading through gossip before a person even arrived somewhere new. Reciprocity kept hunters sharing meat, even when it wasn't their turn to eat well, because the memory of who shared and who didn't lasted for years. Crisis leadership, during famine, migration, or conflict, sometimes did tolerate a stronger, temporary authority, but the moment the crisis passed, that authority was expected to dissolve, or the group dissolved it for him. Kinship built trust, but skill built followers. Elders carried irreplaceable memory in a world with no written records, making them living archives the entire band depended on. Every one of these threads points toward the same conclusion. So the myth of the caveman clubbing his way to power turns out to be almost backwards. Ancient humans didn't merely tolerate leadership. They engineered a system that made tyranny nearly impossible, while still letting genuine skill rise to the surface exactly when it was needed. It took hundreds of thousands of years of built-in social pressure to keep power fluid, shared, and constantly re-earned. And somewhere between agriculture, cities, and the first written laws, we started building something our ancestors would barely recognize. Hierarchies that don't dissolve when the crisis ends. Kings who don't have to prove anything to keep the crown. Which raises an uncomfortable question to end on. Every human alive today still carries the exact same instincts that once made tyranny almost impossible beside a small fire in the dark. So why does it feel so much harder to stop now?